The U.S. government is clearly put a target on Google, now bringing a second case against them for antitrust issues. So there's clearly a concern by the regulators that this is a company that has forward thinking, right? Is not looking to get disrupted, is looking to be a leader in something as significant as this artificial intelligence tool that now all, people have been writing about this for years, but now all of a sudden it's like the first thing you hear about is ChatGPT. Like everyone's now talking about it. They're hearing about tests, how it's being used. It's getting B's in school. Soon it's going to get A's in school. There's all kinds of things that are starting to flow up to the top of the news cycle, and that's obviously concerning some of the regulators because they've pumped well over multiple billions of dollars into this technology because they can, right? And that's why, look, Microsoft is a perennial X in. It scores extremely well in our model. I'm sorry, you mentioned Google, but I think it's also Microsoft is one of the leaders in the ChatGPT space, and it's because it's investing in the future, and how that tool ultimately gets utilized, I think is something everyone should be paying attention to. The most significant risk those companies face isn't in the development of their business, it's in the regulatory environment. How are those that supervise our marketplace and what these companies are able to do going to address their continued growth and the way in which they dominate the investment into the future of technological change? If they can address that risk, that regulatory risk, then these companies are, perennial holds for people because they are just so far ahead. And ultimately, we saw what previous historical regulatory regimes have done to large-scale conglomerate businesses in particular sectors, whether it's in the oil and gas industry or the communications industry. You break them up because you think you're doing a service to the consumer, and you end up just making life worse for everybody else. So it's a point of view. The current administration has a very, very stark point of view that's going to be challenging for the industry in the near term. We'll see how long that administration gets to stay in power to do that. But I think it is the number one risk those companies face. It's not that they're going to become the IBMs of the world. The IBMs of the world became the IBMs of the world because they had poor management. And notwithstanding the fact that it's a technology company, it scores poorly in our model and has been X'd out.
Okay.
If a company is generating surplus and they don't have either an investment opportunity or a dividend distribution policy, then buying back shares is the best way to create long-term shareholder value. And the problem with it is that companies that have that kind of capability get second guessed because they buy back stock if they do it in, disproportionate way. In other words, they're not spreading it out over quarters and not in sort of an average in purchase, right? Because stocks fluctuate in value. But if people bought back stock last year and now their stocks are down, in some cases 50, 60%, and they're still buying back stocks, you're going to second guess, why'd you buy back all those shares last year? Think about how much capital you used to buy it back. And now you could buy it back at 50 cents on the dollar. You should have done it this year. It's real easy for folks to second guess that. But if they're doing it consistently over time, it's going to inure to the benefit of shareholders, especially in long-term buy and hold shareholders. That's quantitative. It's based on the performance. It's the one measurement we use that actually looks at stock price performance. So from the day that CEO steps into the seat and how that stock performs vis-a-vis the other 499 companies in our constituent base is how we measure it. So let's pick on Disney because it's one of the names we were going to maybe talk about.
Yes.
Bob Chapek came in to lead Disney. That factor then started its test. The stock continued to perform poorly. It's performed quite poorly. And so now Bob Iger's in and Bob Jacobs out. You will start a new measurement from that time frame against the other 499 CEOs, but you now get a chance because of what Nelson Peltz is doing to actually see some of the things that the management team was doing at Disney. And while we use this as a tool, it's a weighting within our 7 factors. It's not the only weighting, right? But you could see how deteriorating it was to the company's performance, and they should get a bad score for that. It's like the tail eating the dog. If your management is performing well, certainly your stock should follow that performance. And management is one of the most difficult things to evaluate. First of all, analysts who study companies and make recommendations tend to fall in love with their management teams. And everyone goes into a review, generally speaking, with rose-colored glasses. And if you look at even the Wall Street community that covers from the sell side companies, how many sells are there on stocks that are publicly traded? Very few, if any. And the reason for that is it's just the nature of the community to look at management teams and be somewhat supportive, even when the situation isn't good. But the opposite is quite true. And that's when you see activists come in. Activists come in, like a Nelson Peltz comes into a Disney situation because he's just sort of had it, right? I need to get in there myself so I can fix this. And I can fix it because I have long history of doing things like this. The management team on the other side says, you're an investor, you're not an operator of a business. How do you think you're really going to be able to fix this? So I think management performance, if they're doing well, and the fundamental measurement of that is what's the true test, the stock price should definitely follow. And quite frankly, it does lag because folks don't really appreciate how hard a management job is. If you look at the performance of e-tailing versus big box retailing, one would think that the way in which those stocks, the volatile nature of what happened between those two different sectors, it's sort of astounding to me that people thought that online shopping was almost like done. It's over, right? People are going to go back to just going to stores now. COVID's over. People want to go back into stores. It's a fallacy to believe that that's the case, that we're not going to become even more sophisticated, more effective at making the consumer experience that much better by just shopping online and not having to go into those big box retailers. Those big box retailers are expensive to operate. What I do know is that technological change is a very significant forward-facing risk, and many of the issues we're simply just not aware of them yet. I mean, last year when you interviewed me, ChatGPT did not come up in our conversation. We weren't thinking about it. We weren't talking about it. We weren't really focused on the fact that there was going to be an artificial intelligence tool that was going to help replace a lot of functions that human beings actually have. And so now all of a sudden it's in vogue. Everyone's talking about it. They're trying to think of a commercial application. It's going to transform the way in which many things happen. So let's not underestimate what people who are a lot smarter than both you and I have been studying and thinking about, and thinking more importantly about the future. I would venture a very, very big bet, and you and I have had bets on this show before, that they have been thinking about this for a lot longer than they talked about it, and that their vision of the future is probably more likely than not to be the case. And our vision and lack of understanding is going to be enlightened as we move into more and more technological change and get to appreciate that these companies are making generally most people's lives better.